ncIMPACT is made possible by funding from Civic Federal Credit Union. ncIMPACT is a production of UNC-TV Public Media North Carolina in association with the University of North Carolina School of Government.
We were watching the rates of child abuse and neglect go up and more children ending up in foster care.
We have over 1,000 children in foster care. That is the highest in the state of North Carolina.
When thinking about what she went through during those couple of hours that she was abducted, sexually abused, and then murdered, it was just heart-wrenching.
I don't ever want a child to die because we didn't do the right thing, because I don't think I could live with that.
Education, jobs, health, all these issues affect you. Leaders from across the state, people just like you, are working to make things better. The question is, could you do this in your community as well? I'm Anita Brown-Graham. This is ncIMPACT. Our children are the future of our state. But traumatic childhood experiences can often hinder the potential of our youth. Cumberland County is the first county in North Carolina to develop a community child abuse prevention plan. Let's look at the impact of that plan and how it's working to reduce adverse childhood experiences in Cumberland County.
The Shania Davis case, probably the most recognizable case that we've had in the last 10 to 15 years here in Cumberland County. Shania was a 5-year-old little girl. Shania was abducted from her mother's home. She was taken to a hotel in Sanford about an hour away where she was sexually assaulted. And then the defendant, Mario McNeil, instead of bringing her back to her home, killed her and discarded her body near Sanford. Unfortunately, what we determined is that it was a case of sex trafficking. The mother had willingly given over Shania for the purposes of sex to repay a debt that she had owed the defendant. When thinking about what she went through during those couple of hours that she was abducted, sexually abused, and then murdered, it was just heart-wrenching. It's certainly a case that will stick with me my entire career.
The formation of the community plan started early 2016. I think it was in August. The conversations started in 2013. We were watching the rates of child abuse and neglect go up and more children ending up in foster care. We have 27 or 28 community organizations that are involved that come to the table.
I always say the shelf life for a good youth services detective is probably less than 5 years because it bothers you so much. And because we've never talked about it. You know, we didn't make any change, but I think that we are now. I think our eyes are open as hard as it is.
There is some good that came from this terrible incident, and I know that Shania's family feels that way, that there's awareness brought to this issue. Hopefully it prevents other situations, and also it helps get justice in other situations where something terrible like this occurs.
Welcome, everyone. Sharon, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about these community prevention plans. Why are they important? How are they changing the game for kids in North Carolina?
Well, the prevention plans at the local level are really important because we know that prevention happens locally in communities and in families. And in North Carolina, we've never actually developed plans for preventing abuse and neglect at the local level. We really are excited about bringing folks together across different sectors, the faith community, business community, government, and nonprofits to come together and address the problem together and to create new investments in prevention. We know that we're spending too much money on a preventable problem. We spend $2 billion every year in North Carolina on the downstream consequences of adverse experiences like abuse and neglect. We're not investing enough upstream to prevent it from ever happening in the first place. So this is catalyzing that work for the very first time.
And this is about more than just having a plan, right?
Oh, it's about a plan, and it's about bringing your community together and actually taking that plan into action and implementation, really measuring what's happening and really being able to see measurable change over time.
So, Betsy, from your perspective, what are we missing in North Carolina?
I think we've been missing, not just in North Carolina, but across the country. We've known about the impact of adverse childhood experiences and the lifelong impact across all health outcomes. We've known about the science, this brain science, for a really long time, but we have not organized, we have not invested, we have not figured out a strategic plan to really think how to address this, how to support our families, how to support our communities, how to invest in the health and well-being of our people. And I think really seeing the communities coming together, recognizing this as a true issue and a true biological issue, that's what we've been missing. And so it's really great to see our communities coming together. And then from the state level, we're thinking about how do we create a plan. We're creating our early childhood action plan to really think about from a state level, how do we help invest and organize our communities.
So Elizabeth, you have been working on the ground with some communities. You share a little bit your experiences there.
Sure. So most of our work has been in the schools, but we have certainly, identified the need to have the whole community involved. So even though we're focused working in schools and with whole districts, we understand the need to have other partners and other sectors at the table too. Just knowing that schools can't do this alone. Kids go back home, they go to other service providers. So it really has to be a whole community approach, even though the work that we are doing has been focused in the school setting.
And can you say a little bit more about what that looks like for a school to be leading this work?
Sure. So it really takes, the first step is leadership buy-in. So having the leadership buy-in at the district level so that it can be a district supported initiative, but also having leadership buy-in at the school level. So having the principal and administration bought in so that their whole staff become a part of the plan. So like Sharon said, it is about planning, but within the schools, we're kind of taking that to the next level. In addition to raising awareness and planning, we're actually trying to encourage schools to put action plans into place and implement new strategies.
And so Sharon or Betsy, if you had to fathom a guess, how many communities in North Carolina would you say have these action plans?
Well, we know that Cumberland County is the only county that has actually finished developing their plan. We're currently working with 4 more communities to develop those plans right now.
Educators can play a big role in identifying and responding to child abuse and neglect. Let's look at the impact of how the local school system is making big changes to prevent students from going through adverse childhood experiences.
The Resilience film is a documentary that deals with adverse childhood experiences and their effect on children. And as far as the school system, when we saw it, we decided this has to go to as many groups and as many families and as many teachers as possible.
Check yourselves, make sure you've got control. Show me control.
Some of the big takeaways are school staff have watched this film and they're now thinking about how can I show up differently in my classroom and what are specific things that we can put in place to help students. Sometimes when you are looking at the behavior of children, it's important to ask what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you. We've had a social worker who implemented a reset room at one of our middle schools, and that is kind of a chill out room that when kids realize that they're having a rough day and they need to just kind of chill out and regroup, they can go to this reset room that's at Max Abbott Middle School.
Look, there's blue right there, put yellow.
We feel like empowering parents to be our partners is key for us to work as a stronger community and to realize that that child is at the center and we all have to kind of work together to make that a better place for the children. We've had parent groups and meetings, and we've come together and worked in teams. We came up with a work group that met monthly to talk about the different resources that were available in Cumberland County. And a lot of us would know about one thing, but maybe not know about another thing. So coming together and meeting regularly to build upon our resources and share and work together and being a resource for the community.
Another piece of sticker right here, there's blue.
We have to prepare our students because at some point we are going to sit down and these young people are going to be taking on the jobs that we have and the roles that we have, and we need them to be as healthy as they can possibly be so that they can contribute their piece to society.
Elizabeth, let me start with you. You're working in schools. What are people referring to in schools when they talk about ACE?
So there is the original ACEs study and questionnaire that asked about 10 different types of specific adverse childhood experiences, ranging from different types of abuse and neglect to different things that could be happening in the household. And I would say most of those are still, even though that study was done nearly over 20 years ago, are still the same things that teachers and families are talking about in our schools today. Lots of different types of abuse and neglect. I would say one of the bigger ones that comes up oftentimes in schools is caregiver incarceration, other things happening in the home, caregiver substance abuse, domestic violence. So those are some of the most common ones that we hear, but also some of the newer ones with different systemic issues and racism. And then of course the natural disasters, the more those are happening and the devastation that that's causing to different parts of the state just adds to other levels of trauma and ACEs that families are experiencing that we hear about most in the school setting.
And of course, Betsy, brain science is helping us understand the implications of these ACEs. Interesting that we've sort of broadened our definition from traditional abuse and neglect to other contextual environmental issues that are affecting kids. Can you just talk a little bit about how we're capturing this new brain science in the way that we think about ACEs?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important piece, is really thinking about this brain science of it. And as Elizabeth was saying, there are these two buckets. There's the abuse, sexual, emotional, or physical abuse, and then there's that household dysfunction bucket. So that's living with a parent with mental illness, living with a parent with a substance use disorder. And we think about, we're in the throes of an opioid epidemic, and thinking about those children with those parents struggling with opioid use. And so parental separation. So that second bucket, that household dysfunction bucket, probably is more common than the true severe abuse and neglect. But when we think about when children are in that environment, in that experiencing, having this disruption of the family, having that chaos without a safe harbor, what happens then is that cortisol is the stress level, the stress hormone, and you have this, you're on high alert, you're having this cortisol released all the time in response to this really stressful environment. That cortisol then affects your brain, affects the way that your brain is growing, affects the way that your brain is functioning. And so when we talk about toxic stress as this, that is that cortisol hormone affecting the way that our brain is functioning in response to these really stressful, sustained environments. And that appreciation of that brain science and how it's affecting our children's developing brain is really important, and an element of this I think people are really starting to appreciate more.
So Sharon, as you're working with communities, how in the world are you explaining all of that to community stakeholders so that they understand what they're dealing with?
Well, we're really fortunate. There's a documentary film called Resilience, and we're using that to screen the film for big community audiences to help them understand the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. We love the film. It's an hour long, and the subtitle of it is The Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope. And it not only shares what the Adverse Childhood Experiences study is, it really inspires folks after they finish watching the film to do something. And that really is helping to catalyze communities coming together to talk about this.
And of course, do something is what we're all about here. Thank you. One of the keys to preventing adverse childhood experiences is educating parents. Let's look at the impact of a parenting program in Cumberland County that helps parents learn effective ways to manage their children's behavior.
Things start at home. Everything starts at home for a child. A lot of times parents are faced with behavioral or emotional issues with their child, and they may not even be aware of some of the signs or some of the triggers or some of the tools or strategies that can be used to not only identify those issues, but then to correct those issues.
I think people think that, well, these kids are going to reach out to teachers and they're going to reach out to people that they trust, but they just don't. They've been told so much, what happens in this house stays in this house. So these victims are very different than anybody else in the community because they don't have anybody.
The Triple P program, or Positive Parenting Program, is an internationally acclaimed evidence-based educational and support program for parents and caregivers of children and adolescents. It really is an attempt to further change the culture as it relates to those home environments, making sure that they're nurturing and that they're as conducive as possible for the successful development of children and adolescents in our community.
I really believe over the last 10 years that I've been involved in it that we have seen a culture shift with some entities, some groups that are beginning to recognize, and so I think there's this awareness that's on the ground floor. Hopefully that's about to rise up and become even bigger in our community.
We're approaching it from many different angles, and Triple P is just another angle or another tool, if you will, that our communities will be able to use as we attack that issue.
So what are the community resources? I recognize this, I want to reach out and get some support for an individual or a family. To whom do I turn?
There are lots of places you can turn. Our child advocacy centers are a place of support for families. There are a lot of parenting programs available across the state. That's a really important resource that we really want to see more normalized, that we all know parenting is really hard and it's okay to ask for help. There are programs like Triple P, Incredible Years. There are Circle of Parents programs. We can help particularly really young families that have babies, make sure that they get connected to home visiting programs. There are communities across our state that have universal home visiting programs, like in Durham and Forsyth County with Family Connects. Then there are also Nurse Family Partnership is an incredible home visiting program that really helps parents from prenatal through the first couple of years of life really get the support they need to be the good parents that we need them to be.
And Elizabeth, I assume some of the first recognition happens by teachers in schools.
Absolutely.
To whom or where do those teachers turn for resources?
So there are a lot of great community partners, like Sharon mentioned, that schools are connected to and district staff can help them connect to. One of the biggest things we're working on in schools is helping them create that action plan. So beyond training, know what they can do both as an individual teacher in their classroom, giving them some tools for their toolbox, and then also school-wide some strategies and policies that they can change. But so much of it is about building relationships, and people don't think that that can be such a simple thing. We sometimes just bypass that to think about bigger policies to implement, but just thinking about how teachers can build those healthy and supportive and safe relationships so that when kids come into the building, if home is in a safe place, their community is in a safe place, their classroom and their teacher is somewhere they feel emotionally safe. So much of about what we talk about is specific strategies, but also the broader picture of how to build those safe and supportive relationships for kids.
So Betsy, let me come back to you, because both Sharon and Elizabeth have pointed out in their responses, you got to have resources available when people identify there's trauma. What investments do we need at the state level?
Yeah, so let me talk about two big investments that we're working on. So first, we're working on an early childhood action plan. So we want to think about a plan for the entire state to have our children be healthy, safe and nurtured, and then learning and ready to succeed. That's what we really want. So our first plan is let's put together this action plan and then have commitments across all of our agencies about how are we going to support this plan. Thinking about what is it we can put in the state budget to support all those evidence-based programs that are going on in the communities. And additionally, as part of our Medicaid program, as part of our change in our Medicaid program, we're going to be pulling as many levers to actually free up some Medicaid dollars to be able to fund some of these evidence-based programs that are on the ground, but they are not funded. So we're pulling as many levers as we can from the state to resource these really important programs.
We all share many of the same challenges in our communities, so why not share the solutions as well? Each and every one of us can make a difference. That's what having an impact is all about.
ncIMPACT is made possible by funding from Civic Federal Credit Union. ncIMPACT is a production of UNC-TV Public Media North Carolina in association with the University of North Carolina School of Government.